Well, hello, this is Peter Combs from bitamount.com, bitamountlive.com, and P.O. Combs Asian Art in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And today is Wednesday, December 5th, 2022, and this is another in the little series we're doing on things that I've collected over the years to talk about collections in general. It's sort of just a way to get at the subject, I guess. And this is a story about a vase I bought a number of years ago, almost 20 years ago or so, maybe more, in Massachusetts here, down in Dedham, Mass, from Michael Grogan, who was a New York, originally started at Sotheby's, and he came to Boston in the 1980s, investigating the idea of opening an auction house here on behalf of Sotheby's, as the story goes. I don't know all the details, but that was the story at the time. And Sotheby's decided not to go with opening an auction house in Boston, but by then Michael, I think, fell in love with the idea of having one here. He'd met a number of well-known Boston families that were interested in having an auction house here, some of the old Beacon Hill crowd, and they were willing to put up some money, I think, to get him started, which he did. They did as partners. As far as I know, it was a very successful partnership. He treated everybody great. And along the way, he's handled some absolutely great estates. Early on, he was operating out of the old Peter Fuller Cadillac building down near Boston University. And then he later bought a building in Dedham, and now he's in the last about 6 years ago or so, he bought a building on Charles Street in Boston. And he now focuses mostly, it seems, on fine art, silver, jewelry, small things. He's sort of gotten away from furniture, it seems. I'm not sure if that's his plan, but that's sort of how it looks to be. But back in the day, he got some absolutely great estates from all over the country through his old connections in New York, through some old Sotheby's people, I think, and here and there. Wherever you get estates from, he managed to do it. He was very good at it. And I used to go to his auctions all the time because I made some great buys there, because he didn't have anybody really great with Asian art and sort of just relied on the market to tell him what things were worth. And back in the day, before the internet and all this, it was a pretty good way for a dealer to find some things. And he used to pack the place with dealers, retail people too, but a lot of dealers went to Michael's because they knew what was there. So anyway, we get back to this vase, and I found it in one of his Dedham auctions. I'm going to explain in the clip how it came about, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And for me, it expresses the great part of collecting in buying something that's a bit controversial, buying something that's been the center of a fairly long-running debate and is a rare thing. So there aren't a lot of them around to compare to, but there are some. And I happened to come across this one, and I knew what it was, so I decided to buy it. And I'll explain all of that. All right. And this is the vase. They call them plum bottles or plum vases, plum wine vases, or more commonly known as Meipings. This particular one I spotted sitting across the room in the auction. It was marked Art Deco, 1930s art pottery. But what was interesting about it was when I went over and picked the thing up, it sure looked Chinese to me. And the thick rolled mouth that you see up here. And there's a very, very fine crackle glaze that I'll show you more of all over it, with a flat unglazed bottom that had been chipped out. But what more importantly was on this piece was a sticker. And it was a sticker from the Warren Cox store in New York City, he was the author of the famous 2-volume set on Chinese pottery and porcelain that was published in 1944 and was filled with great illustrations of fine objects from the Metropolitan Museum, the British Museum, the Morphopolis collection, and many others. He was a friend of C.T. Lew's. He knew everybody, and he was well known as an expert on Chinese ceramics in particular. He was also a big fan of Greek pottery. Clearly this is not Greek pottery, but he did have a long history of turning into lamps very rare objects. He thought it was a wonderful way to display them. He and the Yamanaka company were sort of in competition until Yamanaka was taken out at the outbreak of World War II. They were shut down by the federal government. That's another story. But at any rate, Warren continued on and continued lamping great vases and so forth, and he lamped this one. And it is a Tang Dynasty example, and we'll explain how they know it is Tang, because for a long time they were thought to be Northern Sung. And there's one virtually identical to it in the Rijksmuseum collection. If you have the book, you'll find it. I have a photocopy of it here. There are two of them in the Palace Museum. One of them is nearly identical. I found a photograph that I'll share with you on the screen here in a minute. But just wanted to go over it with you and give you some idea what it looked like. But it was really quite an extraordinary thing. And it sits very happily on top of a bookcase in my house. And there it is. And here's another shot of it. And the controversy that was surrounding these vases were they just couldn't figure out when they were made. They hadn't, up for a long time, had any tombs that were exhumed that would definitively date them. And there was a lot of pottery overlapping between certain types of Tangware and certain types of Northern Sungwares, especially whitewares, dingwares. And the natural inclination had been for a long time to ascribe these as all being Northern Sung. The Rijksmuseum example, for example, in their book published a number of years ago, is a very good one illustrated in there. It's extremely similar to this one in shape and style, and they have it listed as Northern Sung. However, a few years after all this, they finally got into some tombs, and I'm going to show you what they came up with. And this was, here we go, all right? And this is why it was fun to own this all the time, because there was sort of a little debate about it, and there aren't many of these around. Here is one that was dug up from the tomb of Duan Beiyong. He was a Tang Dynasty emperor, and it was found, and they say it was found in the Hansi Shai in the eastern suburb of someplace, any rate, doesn't really matter. It's a Chinese suburb, Chinese area. And you'll notice it has a very green tinge to it. And that's because the photography was off on it. There is a greenish tone to both of these vases, but if you don't have your photography and your light set up properly, the green will overtake the image. You'll come up with a bad image. Here's another picture of another one in the National Palace Museum collection that is white. It's the same color as the one that we have. It's a slightly different form. The potting is slightly different, but it's about 8 centimeters taller, so it was slightly elongated and slightly broader at the shoulder. This one is about 7 inches across, and this one I expect is probably around 9 or so inches across. But this one is proportionally and stylistically identical on every front, and it's identical to the one in the Rijksmuseum too. Fairly straight-sided, big, powerful, swollen shoulder coming into this very thin, thickly rolled mouth on it. And if you click along through here, you get a better view of it. There it is. And again, that thickly rolled mouth with lots of crackle. There's a lot of crackle in this piece. Here you can see it. But the thing I wanted to show was, if you look here, you'll see this darkened area where some of the glaze is pulled, and has a celadon-y greenish tinge to it, because there's a little bit of celadon in that, and it made it turn green. All right, and there is another shot of it under brighter light that brought the green up even more. And I suspect what happened was when they shot this, they didn't adjust for color properly, so the green really over accentuated itself. I've seen this before in other porcelains, blue and white porcelains, for example, that were photographed in the blue, the white area actually, because there's a tiny bit of blue in it, can almost look like clair de lune. They get the colors off. But at any rate, this is the piece. And here you have at the bottom this very, very characteristic fairly straight line of unglazed areas that neared the foot, which was something they did to stop the glaze from running over. Here it is here on this one, and here it is here on this one. And then if you take the vase and you turn it over, there's a closer shot of that texture to give you a sense of the gray, how the paste is figured. This is what's really interesting, was that Mr. Cox drilled this vase out, and he used a chisel to do it, which was not an uncommon practice back in the 1920s and 30s when it came to pottery especially. Rather than drilling it pottery, they would sometimes use small chisels and chip away at to open up the bottom so they could fit it for a lamp. And this was something Mr. Cox was known to do. And as I recall, this area here is about where the label was, the Cox label. It's right here, and it's left a bit of a shadow, and that's about all. But this is how the bottom of these old jars looked. But what's really interesting about it is that how white and pure the paste was because this is the area that was exposed during the firing, so it darkens and discolors a bit. But what's really interesting is this area here. How absolutely pure white it is, and it shows you how well they cleaned their clay before they did it. All right, and there's a bit of tape or gunk over on this side I never cleaned off, but that's it. And here's a side shot of the foot rim again, and so forth. But this was apparently in Mr. Cox's lamp shop at one point, and got drilled out, ended up being sold to somebody, and then after selling it to somebody, it went through a series of owners maybe, and dogs are excited, ended up being sold to someone, and then ended up at Michael Grogan's, and I bought it, and it's been here ever since. It's a wonderful thing, but it's interesting because it has a good backstory, and not only about where it came from in the dealer, and it's always nice to know that, but it also is an interesting backstory because of the controversy surrounding these vases. I'm only aware of about 3 or 4 of these in the world that I've seen. The British Museum does not have one. The Metropolitan Museum, as far as I know, does not have one. They certainly don't have one on their website. None have gone through Christie's or Sotheby's that I'm aware of. If any of you know where there's another one, I would love to see it because I'd like to learn more about it. But this is what I've learned about it to date, and it's basically a forerunner of Northern Sung Dingware, but was done during the Tang Dynasty, with a beautiful white glaze and a fine crackle, and powerfully potted. And this type of pot really illustrates how elegant simplicity can be. And this was, of course, the point of it, was that you have these beautiful plum wine vases, absolutely elegantly shaped, beautifully proportioned, wonderful glaze, and done 1,300 years ago. So that's the whole story behind it. I hope you found this interesting, and we'll have another one next week, I think. All right. Have a good rest of your week. We'll be back Friday with the regular video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and on to a new year. Okay. Bye-bye.